Hello, welcome to Know the Faith, Defend the Faith. My name is William Hemsworth, and thank you for joining me today. My guest at this time, attorney, apologist, and author of an awesome new book titled Fragmented, a Theological Story, Peter Cavallaro. Peter, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, William. It's my privilege to be with you here. You've been doing great work. You're very inspiring to me, especially now that you've taken this new step as of a few days ago that we've just discussed. You're a model for discipleship, and I'm happy to talk to you today.
Well, thank you for your kind words, and I truly appreciate it because it is nerve-wracking, but God's got this, so it's all good.
Oh, that's an attitude.
Now, before we get to your book, can you give us, our listeners, a little background about you, like who you are, what your story is, how you got into apologetics?
Sure. Well, I think a lot of the apologists have sort of as a badge of honor, a great conversion story or a road to Damascus experience, and even you had a conversion to our faith, which is a cool thing. I actually had a pretty nondescript in that sense. I mean, I was raised in the suburbs of New York by a middle class Italian American devout Catholic family, and we went to mass. I went to public school most of my education until I went to high school, where I went to a great Catholic school, Chaminade High School on Long Island. But I think in a way that ordinariness is what, for me, provides the fervor for now what I'm doing, which is apologetic work, because while I don't have sort of this point at which I can remember where faith wasn't a part of my life, the same way someone who, has always lived with clean air, clean water, knows firsthand how valuable those things are and is passionate about fighting for it and spreading it to other people. I mean, with me, faith is like, the air I breathe, the water that I drink, and in that sense, it's always been a bedrock for me. And so that is, I think, the fervor with which I approach, evangelism and apologetic work. And I mean, I've always enjoyed writing, and I've always enjoyed all sorts of intellectual, academic pursuits. But I wasn't at the point where I was going to be writing a work of this nature. And I think the formative point in my experience was when I went off to college, and I went to Georgetown University, which is a fantastic Catholic institution, has very, very good opportunities for someone to delve into, a variety of directions. And I think two formative things happened there, both in my freshman year, that have led me to this, and I'll take them sort of out of chronology.
Okay.
The first semester of that year, I took a basic government class that I needed to take for a requirement, which was taught by the late great Father James Shaw, fantastic Catholic philosopher. He's probably written about 50 books. He's influential in a variety of fields. He wasn't a theologian, and he wouldn't even call himself a philosopher. He really was housed in the political philosophy department. And he mostly specialized in classical philosophy, like pre-Christian Plato and Aristotle. And then especially as Aristotle would become synthesized with Catholic faith in the form of Thomas Aquinas. And he was a master teacher. It's really hard to describe his influence on his students. You would have to almost have sat through one of his lectures to just know how he was speaking to his students' souls. And I get in there as a freshman, and when you go to college, it's very intimidating. I mean, you really have to take you have to think carefully about which classes you take, which friends you associate with, which opportunities you pursue, because college is kind of like an all-you-can-eat buffet, right? I mean, there's so many options, and you can't have it all, and it's very overwhelming. And the way that Father Shaw thought of it was that he was here to really nurture the souls of his students, not just teach them knowledge. And I actually left that class a little bit frustrated. I didn't take any more classes with him for about a year, because at that time in my life, I was very much intimidated, I think, by philosophy, by knowledge, by wisdom, and while he opened the door to the great unknown and sort of the humility that comes with knowing how much you don't know. At the same time, that there's a bit of frustration involved in that humility for an upstart young intellectual student, freshman student. And I really almost wanted to shut the book on that kind of stuff, and I didn't want to delve into it anymore because it frustrated me. I wanted answers. I wanted, and and it wasn't until a year later when I saw that Father was teaching so he would always teach his basic course, and then for those who had taken the basic course, the initiated, you had the option of then taking one of his advanced classes, and he always specialized in one great element of political theory or philosophy. And as fate would have it, he was teaching his seminar just on Thomas Aquinas. And I didn't know much about Thomas's philosophy at the time because I had just taken the basic course and I'd taken other things. But this class changed my life, and I was basically moved by the beauty of the intellect of St. Thomas and the truths that he was conveying, the timeless truths. There was a particular line in that class that when I heard it, it blew my mind, which is, and this might have been Father's paraphrasing of St. Thomas, but truth is the conformity of the mind with reality. And that line, something about it, it just awakened me to the fact there's this body of truth out there that exists independent of us, and that knowledge exists when our mind becomes conformed to that pre-existent truth. And that set me on a path for just deepening my intellectual side of my faith. I buried myself in scholastic philosophy, classical philosophy, and of course theology, also scripture and all the the bread and butter stuff. But the second thing, which actually happened earlier, that was also the formative experience in my college career that really in a long-winded way brought me here, was that shortly after I joined freshman year of college, people were saying, there's a debate happening in the administrative building, let's go down and see. They're debating the existence of God. And I thought that was interesting. So I went and wanted to sit in this debate. And because I just hadn't been aware that, the existence of God was something that was hotly debated. This is also, again, before I had waded into the scholastic philosophers and St. Thomas and all that. And I was privileged to watch this debate between an eminent, I think he was Oxford or Cambridge Don, Alistair McGrath, great Christian apologist, good writer. And I was so impressed by how he comported himself and defended Christian beliefs from an intellectual standpoint, and harnessed his oratory and the written word to serve God in this very unique way. I was very interested in how that could be a path that someone could take to serve the Lord. And his opponent in the debate, which in an inverse sense actually inspired me even more, was the great, I'm using the title that he famously denied to God in the title of his famous work, Christopher Hitchens, who really was a very formidable foe of the Christian faith, a very lethal mind toward, on the side of atheism, but he was a formidable speaker and writer. I mean, his intellect challenged me in a way that made me want to get to a point where I could lend my voice to this conversation in a way that could push back against some of the things he was saying, because he, for those who are familiar with his works or have seen him debate or heard him speak, and he's now since passed away, but he's the kind of foe that you kind of wish was on your side, because he's such a towering presence and difficult intellect to grapple with. And so seeing him kind of sparked the flame in me and wanted me to push my limits and try to think about how I might marshal my ideas and the written word to be a soldier on the battlefield for God. So that's kind of how the seeds got planted.
That's interesting that you talk about Hitchens having that effect, because when I started getting into this as well, I started reading some of Richard Dawkins' stuff, and it was kind of the same thing. I had to like dig deep down and not to counter, but I need answers for what these people are saying, because it's becoming so much more popular, especially online. So that's interesting. Now, your book, Fragments, how did you come up with this concept? Because it is an interesting concept in the course of theological work. How'd you come up with this idea for Fragments?
Well, the book actually, as it exists, is really a synthesis of two different things that I pulled off the shelf that I had been working on for various points in time. And the fact that it's a combination of two things, I think explains, now that you've read it, why it is a bit of a uncategorizable genre in the sense. I mean, on the one hand, and this actually segues right after what I just described about how when I first got to college, I'm imbued with this kind of fervor to channel my intellectual energies toward maybe getting, wading into the apologetics field. I wasn't even out of college when I started to dabble in writing, about, trying to put pen to paper and say, well, how would I defend God? And I had, by that point, I had studied Anselm and Aquinas and sort of the classical defenses for the existence of God. And I wanted to sort of throw my hat in the ring and just see if I could come up with any kind of unique ideas on that subject. I mean, it's kind of the same trick of like asking someone who's an aspiring master chef to, cook a great steak. It's like, is there any way to cook steak that's never been done before? I mean, or can you simply just, try to refine the recipes, maybe throw in a couple signature things of your own? But I mean, it's such a classic dish, but theoretically, all the greats that have come before you have already kind of, you would think, pushed the limits and thought of how to do it. So I wanted to challenge myself and think, is there any way that I can come up with substantively unique things to say on this topic? And also, I suppose, presentation-wise, unique angles with which to approach it. And that's where the second piece of the work comes in. So in college, I had started writing what has become the proofs for the existence of God that I put forward in the book, as well as some of the other doctrinal things that are in the book. So it was more of the nonfiction type of work. Separate from that, in my earlier days as an attorney, on business trips and stuff, when I was sort of had some free time, I had this idea that kept coming back to me and it took a while for it to take shape, but it was this idea of a deity, of a divine figure narrating in a poetic fashion how the earth was created, in metaphorical ways, and just exploring the mystery and grandeur of creation in a very poetic way. And I kept writing out this thing, which started as a poem, which has now become the first chapter of the book, which has a very prologue feel to it. And that was just me writing and then rewriting and then deleting and then writing again, because it kept coming back to me, this poetic idea of a deity describing creation. And then from that evolved the idea of, well, who is the deity saying all this to? And then I had this idea for the deity saying this in a face-to-face conversation with a person. And in the Bible itself, in the Old Testament, there's a lot of imagery of God having almost face-to-face conversations with people in the more primordial sections of Genesis. And this is where the idea came for those who aren't familiar with the work. What it basically is at heart, it's a work of apologetics. There's a lot of arguments and ideas that I put forward, proofs for the existence of God, grappling with these conversations about the mystery of creation, the problem of suffering, all the kinds of things that I don't think as Christians we can run away from. We need to have our answers to, and we need to address in an intellectual fashion. So at heart, it's a nonfiction. It would be in the nonfiction part of the library, but it's framed in the context of a story and there's some minimal world building that I engage in just to set the stage, as William knows, as having read it, and the backdrop is, it's a world where gods, and there are plural gods, created the world, but they didn't conceal themselves from humankind. But for certain reasons, humankind eventually turned on them and started hunting the gods to extinction. And so the protagonist character is known as the God Slayer, and this God Slayer has this intellectual hunger the same way that we all do. We all have to grapple with these questions in our life. And yet the God Slayer has the luxury of being able to be face to face with the deities who created things and can ask the questions that we ourselves might want to ask our God. And so in the course of the conversations that the God Slayer has with the gods, that's where the more doctrinal stuff is conveyed. That's how it came to be. I fused two different things.
So how long did it take you to do that fusion? How long did it take for the book to come together?
Well, the earliest traces of it, the earliest fragments of it, if I may say, were due date to at least 2010, 10 years ago when I was, in the more mature phases of my college experience. And then the early pieces of the fictional parts, I started drafting in, maybe 2014, 15, just on the side as just, I have a file with scraps of paper, things that I tend to write from time to time. And the fusion didn't happen until, maybe a few years ago. I started having some thoughts about, maybe there's a way to take this and put that here and use this as the skeleton. But in terms of the writing process for the current work, I probably was spending the last maybe 13 months on it.
Okay. And it just released on August 12th, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, congratulations.
Thanks.
It's had some great success so far, some great reviews.
Thank you.
So it's having a good impact. So great work. And like I said, it's it's unique. Like you're fusing the fiction and the nonfiction together in a great story. And if it's all right with you, I want to talk about the proofs of God that you have in the book, because I think, at least in today's day and age, it's something that will stick out to a lot of people. And there's a lot of other great things in there as well. But in your opinion, what was the hardest part for you in doing this conversation between the God Slayer and the deities in regards to the existence of God? Which argument was hardest?
Well, so on the proofs, which was actually the earliest stuff that I had taken a stab at, there's 4 proofs. And for those who haven't read it, they're all what I call experiential proofs, which is that they're rooted in human experience. And by the way, the reason why I think the use of this framing device is such an apt, neat way of framing it is because, the God Slayer is living in a world in which the existence of the gods is not in dispute because they're walking and talking, amongst us. And the context of the conversation that the God Slayer has with the gods is that they, or one of the gods in particular, asks the God Slayer to imagine a hypothetical world where they couldn't take the existence of gods for granted, and the gods were sort of invisible to the human eye, and that is, of course, our world, where we're challenged with a faith component to our beliefs. And so in that context is where they're discussing these proofs. I felt that the proofs, so I had started drafting them in college, and one of the things I was very concerned with was wanting to make sure that I could say stuff that was fairly novel, but at the same time, obviously, I'm standing on the shoulders of the great Catholic minds that have come before. I mean, that's one of the great things about the Catholic faith, is that there's no such thing as, oldies, golden oldies. I mean, our tradition is a living, breathing tradition that, builds on top of each other, and we don't run away from, in many ways, the writings of St. Thomas, St. Bonaventure, Boethius, Athanasius, Anselm, they're just as fresh today. They're just as soundly grounded today. So I was coming off of that background, but at the same time, I didn't want to read too much of modern apologetics while I was thinking through these proofs, because I wanted to kind of challenge myself to work through them. The easiest one for me was the proof about beauty, because I like to hike. I like to take nature photographs, and to me, that is one of the contexts in which I find God is the beauty of the natural world. And so that one came the easiest to me. And then the other ones I kind of had to work through. They're all things that I find God, and I find God in love. I find God in moral conduct. I find God in creativity. Obviously, the book itself was a work of creativity, but I then had to challenge myself to say, well, how am I finding God? How are the feelings that I'm experiencing pointing me toward God? So the challenge, I think, was working through that, phenomenology, and just thinking about, well, what is going on here, and trying to describe it.
Okay. So what feedback have you received from readers?
Well, I definitely, folks have found it helpful toward their faith in a few ways. I mean, one of the ways that I'm actually pleased with is that, in the earlier parts and the different deities have different characteristics and different writing styles applicable to them, which is what I try to do. And the first speaker that we're introduced to is a deity that's far more poetic and metaphorical and allegorical than, you know, the more rational, logic-based conversation that happens later in the book, which encompasses the proofs, for example. And some people have found that they've taken great comfort in just the imagery that has come up in sort of describing these scenes of nature and these scenes of human life and human connection. And I'm proud of that, because I took great lengths to try to think about ways that I could phrase things that could just give people that feeling, you know, when you listen to a song and you might hear just a note or a melody that just touches your soul, or you just see an image in a photograph that just, you know, you want to step into that image and it just gives you that indescribable feeling. That was one of the things I strove to do with the writing, especially in the more poetic parts. And I was pleased that some people have found those lines to be comforting to them, because it's trying to simulate the fact that God can be found around any corner that we're in life, no matter what artistic medium we might be exposed to, no matter what physical setting we might be. God can be found in the most unexpected of places, and so I've been very pleased. The most gratifying thing is for any apologist is, well, I guess the gold standard is if an unbeliever comes to you and says, now I'm a believer because of that. You know, that would be great. I'm waiting for that. But apart from that, the most gratifying thing of this business, I would think, is for someone to come to you and say that my faith has been enhanced, whether in large part or even in a small way, by what you've done, and that's gratifying.
That's awesome, and I'm glad to hear it. Now, some of the reviews I looked at, one reviewer said it reminded him of C.S. Lewis's Screw Tape Letters. I don't know if you saw that review.
It's high praise. I mean, certainly, obviously, he's the godfather of the modern apologists.
Right.
And you look, to one extent, I would agree with that, in the sense that the Screw Tape Letters is also kind of hard to categorize, right? I mean, it's fictional nonfiction, right? I mean, so.
Right. And there's a lot of great stuff in the book. It definitely will enhance your faith. It'll give you a lot more knowledge. You did great work on this one. So where can listeners check out the book?
Well, it's right now it's on Amazon.com exclusively. And I am working on getting it into certain independent bookshops. And I'm already making progress on that front, but it's probably going to be regional at first. But Amazon.com knows no bounds,
Right.
and so that's the place to go.
And is it on ebook and paper?
Yes, both formats. Multiple people have said you should make an audiobook, and that might be something down the line, because I have heard many people say that. You, having read it now, might see how that could be a little challenging, both because there's these multiple speaking parts, but also because there's some instances where you have to, I think, have a fast syntax to be able to say these very clunky sentences. But that people want the ebook, the audiobook.
All right. Well, check the book out. It's on Amazon. It's on Kindle and paperback. And if you're a member of Kindle Unlimited, it's included in there. So check it out. Peter, thank you for taking some time and talking about your book, and thank you for all the work you're doing.
Oh, thank you, William. God bless you, and good luck on this new quest, which I have every expectation will be a success for you and your family.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
All right. Good talking to you.